I wanted to read about the FDA. It's quite interesting. I mentioned before about genetics, eugenics, depopulation is such been a big concern of the big globalists for a long time. And no one really cared in the first world countries about it because it's always them over there that are going to be killed off, not us. And that's the big flaw in your thinking because the globalists, as I say, have no favorites. The peasant of Britain or the US, Canada is no different than the peasant of China or Africa to them. And they poison us off. We know they poison us off because we have so many diseases now that are definitely food-related and they've broken out since about the 50s. We've had inoculations galore, and of course IQs go down and everyone's allergic now. Everyone's got a compromised immune system, and it's just a big mystery as to why it's happening. It's interesting too that one fellow who, he watched a thing on Tony Blair when he was running for the elections, the first elections in the 90s, and Tony Blair got a top chef in, I think a Korean chef in, to entertain a whole bunch of dignitaries and impress them all. And in 1998, I think it was, and he said, and remember, I don't want any of that GM food ordered. This is before most of the public heard the term GM, genetically modified food. And this is the same character that wouldn't eat it himself, who pushed it on the public in Britain. And made an exemption for the politicians not to eat it, so they got proper food and natural food coming in. This is deliberate, folks. It's all deliberate. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, finally admits chicken meat contains cancer-causing arsenic. It says, but keep eating it, yo. It says, after years of sweeping the issue under the rug and hoping no one would notice, the FDA has now finally admitted that chicken meat sold in the US contains arsenic, a cancer-causing toxic material that's fatal in high doses. But the real story is, where does this arsenic come from? Well, it's added to the chicken feed on purpose. Even worse, the FDA says its own research shows that the arsenic added to the chicken feed ends up in the chicken meat, where it's consumed by humans. Well, I'll tell you, there's a genius at work here. So far, the last 60 years, American consumers who eat conventional chicken have been swallowing arsenic, a known cancer-causing chemical. And there's links to all the effects it has on you. Until this new study, both the poultry industry and the Food and Drug Administration denied that arsenic fed to chickens ended up in their meat. The fairy tale excuse story we've been all fed for 60 years is that arsenic is excreted in the chicken feces. There's no scientific basis for making such a claim. It's just what the poultry industry wanted everyone to believe. But now the evidence is so undeniable that the manufacturer of the chicken feed product known as Roxarson has decided to pull the product off the shelves. And the link is there about that too. It says, and what's the name of this manufacturer that's been putting arsenic in the chicken feed for all these years? Pfizer, big pharma business, of course. The very same company that makes vaccines containing chemical adjuvants that are injected into chicken. It's amazing too, you use some of these chickens to inject into us. It's the same boys, isn't it? I mean, you think it's all science. Technically, the company making Roxarson chicken feed is a subsidiary of Pfizer called Alpharma LLC. Even though Alpharma has now agreed to pull this toxic feed chemical off the shelves in the United States, it says it won't necessarily remove it from feed products in other countries unless it is forced by regulators to do so, as reported by AP. So, it says, but even as this arsenic-containing product is pulled off the shelves, the FDA continues its campaign of denial, claiming arsenic in chickens is at such a low level that it's still safe to eat. You know, this is even as the FDA says arsenic is a cancer-causing agent, meaning it increases the risk of cancer. So there's your double speak for you, folks. But it's all an accident, isn't it? It's just an accident that they're poisoning you. And that's how most folk will take it. Well, nobody would really do that on purpose. I mean, I wouldn't, would you? That's how you do it. Another article here is from another site. It's called 6 Real Examples of Food Terrorism. It says, the latest warning coming from the British intelligence that Al-Qaeda and other political organizations could contaminate the food supply as part of a continuing plotline that hides the obvious. Our food already has been poisoned under the auspices of oversight agencies who've been complicit in very real threats to the public food supply. The following toxins offered into the marketplace by corporate government collusion have contributed to far more sickness and death than E. coli or salad bar terrorists ever will. Unless, of course, the terrorists have bioengineered a superbug or it has escaped from a bioweapons lab like the one at Fort Detrick, Maryland. And then they go to pesticides. Aside from the fact that pesticides have been linked to lower IQ in children, thus altering the future potential of human society, but it makes them awfully obedient, doesn't it? DDT and the cocktail of other pollutants and synthetic chemicals now include those used in GM food production, such as glyphosate it's called. Even more alarming is that pollutants that have been banned for decades are still present in 100% of pregnant women, while those from genetically modified food appear in 80% of unborn fetuses, which is unborn baby, I prefer that word. The presentation below offers additional analysis of the health effects, particularly on the immune system. And you wonder why you have no immune system, eh? Then, of course, at the top of the list is fluoride. Sodium fluoride is an industrial-grade hazardous waste material. That's true. So they used to have to pay to dump it because it was so highly toxic until they thought, well, we can make money by making the idiots eat it and drink it. It says made during the production of fertilizer. It's also a waste product from the aluminum industry. Its past history includes patented uses of rat poison and insecticide. So that's good enough for people to eat, though, isn't it? It's pretty good. Dr. Paul Connett is leading the fight against mandatory water fluoridation. People are finally waking up to the hazards and are now demanding that governments remove this deadly poison. Let's keep in mind that it was put there with full knowledge of its toxicity and has led to massive negative health effects. Dr. Connett explains in an all-see, must-see video, and they have the links here to that too. Mercury in both organic and inorganic form. It wreaks havoc with the nervous system, especially the developing nervous system of a child. I'll put a child or a baby here. It penetrates all living cells of the human body and has been documented most as increasing the risk for autism. This calls into question mercury's use in dental fillings, vaccines, and just about anything containing high fructose corn syrup. Oh, that's a killer, that one. A near staple in the American diet, including baby food. It has also been known for, they actually put that stuff over a heated tank of mercury vapor. That's how it's done to get that fructose corn syrup. It has also been known for years that mercury fumes from CFL compact fluorescent tube lights, bulbs, pose a serious threat which goes far beyond eye strain, migraines and depression. But still they have been pushed under the green agenda and are set to be completely phased in by 2014. And then we go on to genetically modified organisms. Monsanto owns nearly 90% of staple GMO crops, such as corn, soy, and cotton. Monsanto started as a chemical company that brought the world poisons like Agent Orange and Roundup. Independent studies of frankenfood have shown a link to organ failure. It did in all the studies I've done on mammals. A Russian study has concluded near total sterility in GMO soy-fed hamsters by the third generation. So it isn't just the first generation that's eating it. It literally will hit the second and third generation. And other animal studies have shown potentially pre-cancerous cell growth, smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partly atrophied livers, and damaged immune systems, according to a comprehensive article by Jeffrey M. Smith that also highlights the process of intimidation that even well-regarded scientists have been subjected to when publishing their research. Perhaps a recent mainstream article theorizing that a massive 64% increase in bowel cancer among young people is attributable to heavy drinking and obesity should be redirected towards the rise in the prevalence of GMO. And that is true. You see, that these toxic substances end up in the bowel, and that's where you end up getting bowel cancer, because the tissue there literally is radicalized. The cells are radicalized by the poisons which sit there before they're excreted. Never used to have bowel cancers in places like Scotland, before processed food. That was pretty well unknown. Bisphenol A, and this is of course part of the sterility program to reduce the population. The FDA failed to warn the public about this chemical found in plastic packaging, including baby food containers, baby bottles, and pacifiers. Mind you, they knew about it in 1890, what it did to mainly men, really male children, as early as the fetus. Within the first, I think it was 8 to 12 weeks. That's when you're just going to decide if you're going to be a healthy male or not. And the mothers who drink a lot of this stuff and ingest it through different means, and even through their cosmetics too, it's added there as well, just to make sure they get a good dose of it. it will give them adverse effects and even sterility down the line. So I'll put this link up as well. It goes on and on. Aspartame, of course, that Rumsfeld pushed through. He used to be the CEO of the company that made it. But it's just astonishing that the public can't catch on that this is not by accident. And the sad thing is too, they're so well trained, they're domesticated like animals, that even when they hear this stuff, they'll say, oh, that's terrible. But then they'll eat it again. Say, well, they must really, we've got all these experts test, they wouldn't really give it to us if it harmed us. And that's the double thing that they have, because they're so domesticated. They're taught not to think for themselves, you see. And that's terribly sad, isn't it? Terribly sad. And also, too, I've talked so many times about from their own websites or articles or books from even 1920s or later on depopulation. They need to depopulate most countries. How could they do it? Charles Galton Darwin, in his book, The Next Million Years, talked about various ways of poisoning us in the food. Well, they have put the GM food out there with lots of pesticides in it too. And the water supply, well, we know our water supply, if you're in town supply at all, is full of various things, not just the usual ones that are mentioned, but various other things as well. They've even talked about putting lithium in it. No kidding, at world level meetings. And maybe they have. But also, Galton Darwin talks about using hormones and altering people's hormones. That way too, he said, if the women become more masculine and the men would become more effeminate. But both actually would drop with their fertility rate would plummet. And I've talked to guys before who are literally losing their sexual drive in their mid-20s, around before they're 30 years of age, that they're losing the drive, just beginning to lose interest. And here's one on women now from mainstream. 1 in 20 women hit by early menopause. Doctors baffled at rising numbers of under 40s affected women. Most of them are in their 30s now. More than 1 in 20 women go through an early menopause, which puts them at greater risk of heart attack, stroke and bone disease in later life, warns researchers. Higher than expected numbers stop having periods before the age of 40 for no known medical reason, the studies found. Around 6% of women had an unexplained premature menopause, leaving them infertile at an early age. The figure is much higher than previous estimates dating back to the 1980s. So it's working, the agenda's working well, right? As of low as 1%. A further 2% had gone through an early menopause due to cancer treatment or surgery to remove the ovaries. And that's skyrocketing too. Women from the lowest social class are almost 3 times as likely to experience menopause before the age of 40 than those from the highest social class. So that would give you a link, again, with the weaponized food that you're forced to eat at that level because you can't afford the good stuff. And it says a study at Imperial College London is one of the most comprehensive to be carried out into premature menopause. In the UK, the average age of menopause is 51 years when women's natural supply of estrogen dwindles and ovaries run out of eggs. The lack of estrogen means women lose their natural protection against heart disease and thinning bones. Anyway, as I say, the agenda's well on its way when folk are becoming infertile in their 30s now. Now, there's 1, 2 on your food. Your food is weaponized. I've mentioned that years ago. All your food is weaponized. You have 2-tier food today. Actually, it's 3-tier food, but it's 2-tier for most folk. And you have the rubbish you eat at the supermarkets, which are all genetically modified vegetables, soaked in heaviest pesticides, and they also are GM modified to produce their own pesticides as well. So you make sure you get healthy doses, healthy for killing you off, that is, of poisons. And that is the plan. That is the plan discussed at high levels many years ago. How would you bring the public down? I've read them here on the air from some of the biggest players. You either use their food, their water, you can inject them with inoculations, vaccines. It's very simple. And you think they're not doing it. Of course they're doing it. They have taken these things very seriously. And they don't wait for volunteers. We have all the top big ones now at the United Nations coming out openly, and all their associates coming out openly saying there's too many people. We've got to have rapid depopulation. But anyway, most folk will never bring themselves to believe that people will actually do that to them. Just like the folks who are getting bombed in Libya, huddling in their homes, I'm sure before all this happened, would never think that the people from America or Britain or France would do that to them. That's how it is. That's the real world. Anyway, genetically engineered rice is a Trojan horse, misled by Bill Gates and Monsanto. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has approved $20 million in new monies towards the development of golden rice. Now, golden rice, I remember, was started off by Rockefeller. And there was articles came out about it too that had very good properties for sterilizing people at the time in the mainstream. So I guess they've jumped on the bandwagon. And it says it's untested and highly controversial GE, genetically engineered crop that threatens biodiversity and brings risk bringing economic and ecological disaster to Asia's farms. Anyway, they're into this whole thing here, but it's really a big PR program as well. By giving out so-called free rice to everyone, they hope they'll stop using their own rice that they've been growing for centuries, and they'll start buying the stuff from them. Then you're dependent on them every year to buy the rice, because the rice has the killer gene in it. In other words, it won't reproduce itself, and the seed will be sterile. That's the part of it too. So it takes your freedoms away. They've done it all across the planet by gifts. The United Nations has given so many gifts of so many thousands of tons of modified seed that they've literally finished off all the centuries and centuries of grafting one plant to another that they did for their own particular region. Now they're totally dependent on Monsanto for their seed every year. All the real seed, the stuff they were collecting, went to special bases, as we well know, off the coast of Norway and other places. There are 3 of them. And that's for the next society after we're all dead, which shouldn't be too long. I'll put this link up again and you can read it for yourself because it's too much to read tonight. Scientists warn of link between dangerous new pathogen and Monsanto's Roundup. This is another expose on the same, but they've already found out. A plant pathologist experienced in protecting against biological warfare recently warned the USDA of a new self-replicating microfungal virus-sized organism which may be causing spontaneous abortions in livestock, sudden death syndrome in Monsanto's Roundup Ready soy, and wilt in Monsanto's RR corn. What's it do to humans, eh? We're mammals too. Dr. Ron M. Huber, who coordinates the Emergent Diseases and Pathogens Committee of the American Phytopathological Society as part of the USDA National Plant Disease Recovery System, warned Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack that this pathogen threatens the U.S. food and feed supply and can lead to the collapse of the U.S. corn and soy export markets. Likewise, deregulation of GE alfalfa could be a calamity, he noted in his letter, reproduced in full below. So the whole letter is here. So on January 27th, Vilsack gave blanket approval to all genetically modified alfalfa, following orders from President Obama. He also removed buffer zone requirements. That means they can plant them all next to all organically grown stuff and so on, without telling anybody else that's there. So it blows across and contaminates everything. This is seen as a deliberate move to contaminate natural crops and destroy the organic meat and dairy industry, which relies on GM-free alfalfa. Such a genetic contamination will give the biotech industry complete control over the nation's fourth largest crop. It will also ease the transition to using GE alfalfa as a biofuel. This is my letter to Secretary Vilsack was a request to allocate necessary resources to understand potential nutrient-disease interactions before making, in my opinion, an essentially irreversible decision on deregulation of RR alpha, Huber told Food Freedom in an email. But he cautions, although the organism has been associated with infertility, isn't that wonderful? It's all coincidence, you understand, for the ones who still want to use Facebook and MySpace. It says, and spontaneous abortions in animals, and no doubt people too. Associations are not always evidence of cause in all cases and do not indicate what the predisposing conditions might be. These needs to be established through thorough investigation, which requires a commitment of resources. Now, it's against the law for any other corporation, rather than the ones with the patents on these seeds, to do the investigations and testing on them. So it's all their own way. But this is an agenda, folks. It's working very well. People are tired, sick, and got lots of cancers. Depopulation. And they're sterile too. Back with more after this. I wanted to read about the FDA is quite interesting. This, and I mentioned before about genetics, eugenics, depopulation is such a big concern of the big globalists for a long time. And no one really cared in the first world countries about it because it's always them over there that are going to be killed off, not us. And that's the big flaw in your thinking because the globalists, as I say, have no favorites. The peasant of Britain or the US, Canada is no different than the peasant of China or Africa to them. And they poison us off. We know they poison us off because we have so many diseases now that are definitely food related and they've broken out since about the 50s. We've had inoculations galore, and of course IQs go down and everyone's allergic now. Everyone's got a compromised immune system, and it's just a big mystery as to why it's happening. It's interesting too that one fellow who, he watched a thing on Tony Blair when he was running for the elections, the first elections in the 90s, and Tony Blair got a top chef in, I think a Korean chef in, to entertain a whole bunch of dignitaries and impress them all. And in 1998, I think it was, and he said, and remember, I don't want any of that GM food. I finally admitted that chicken meat sold in the US contains arsenic, a cancer-causing toxic material that's fatal in high doses. But the real story is, where does this arsenic come from? Well, it's added to the chicken feed on purpose. Even worse, the FDA says its own research shows that the arsenic added to the chicken feed ends up in the chicken meat, where it's consumed by humans. Well, I'll tell you, there's a genius at work here. So far, the last 60 years, American consumers who eat conventional chicken have been swallowing arsenic, a known cancer-causing chemical. And there's links to all the effects it has on you. Until this new study, both the poll ordered. This is before most of the public heard the term GM, genetically modified food. And this is the same character that wouldn't eat it himself who pushed it on the public in Britain. And made an exemption for the politicians not to eat it, so they got proper food and natural food coming in. This is deliberate, folks. It's all deliberate. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, finally admits chicken meat contains cancer-causing arsenic. It says, but keep eating it, yo. It says, after years of sweeping the issue under the rug and hoping no one would notice, the FDA has now, the industry and the Food and Drug Administration, denied that arsenic fed to chickens ended up in their meat. The fairy tale excuse story we've been all fed for 60 years is that arsenic is excreted in the chicken feces. There's no scientific basis for making such a claim. It's just what the poultry industry wanted everyone to believe. But now the evidence is so undeniable that the manufacturer of the chicken feed product known as Roxarson has decided to pull the product off the shelves. And the link is there about that too. It says, and what's the name of this manufacturer that's been putting arsenic in the chicken feed for